I like to quote an Israeli, I'm going to throw around wind up, a former national security advisor who talked about the role of why the military and power is so important. Now, the Brotherhood is working with imperialism in both Syria and in Libya. It's not just the Muslim Brotherhood is a pan-Muslim organization. And they're doing very reactionary things in Libya and Syria. But the U.S. still doesn't trust them, and certainly doesn't trust them in Egypt, and the Israelis don't either. It says that if Egypt did cancel its peace treaty with Israel tomorrow or in 5 years, a government dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood would mean you can't exclude the possibility of a war with Egypt. During the last 30 years, when we had any military confrontation, whether in the first or second Lebanon wars, the intifadas, and all these events, we could be confident that Israel would not try to intervene militarily. So that's what it's about as far as imperialism goes. That's why, while the U.S. can't spit enough venom against Assad, the fact that the Egyptian military has canceled parliament and imposed martial law and killed 800 people, where's the outcry? There was a Pentagon release that said, well, U.S. Defense Minister Leon Panetta called Field Marshal Tatwana, and he said, well, I hope you're going to make a transition soon. And he said, well, yeah, we're going to make a transition to democracy soon. And we're committed to holding free and fair elections. And Panetta said, oh, and then they both agreed on the importance of the U.S.-Egyptian strategic relationship. This is in a Pentagon release. So I don't think it could be clearer, And that's the same thing what happened this week when the Bahrain court gave doctors who treated demonstrators jail terms. There was a U.S. human rights official there, and he held a news conference and said, we are severely disappointed. What about, humanitarian intervention in those countries? In dealing with the military right from the beginning, the revolutionary youth learned that their objectives were achieved only when they took the demands to the streets. The millions that are still taking to the streets today show that the Egyptian struggle there is far from over. It may just be at an earlier stage than some thought. One lesson is clear from the Egyptian experience. Just to have basic bourgeois rights in Egypt, it will be necessary to smash the bourgeois state. Looking at the corrupt, bureaucratic, repressive, and secretive Egyptian military, the words of Karl Marx, as quoted in Lenin's The State and Revolution, ring especially true. He said, we need to smash the bureaucratic military machine. The corrupt state apparatus cannot be used to further the interests of the workers and the students, nor will it step aside to the people's will or kindly wither away. It must be smashed, root and branch, and replaced with an entirely different kind of state, one which is run by the workers themselves in the interest of the oppressed and exploited. The struggle of the Egyptian people has inspired the world. Let all of us who fight for social and economic justice take to heart this fundamental lesson of their struggle when we wage our own. I think it's very important that both Russia and China have stood up to this imperialist coalition. I think they learned their lesson from Libya. I think they weren't quite sure what was in store, and then they saw what happened in Libya, where they had their own interests there. And they do, Russia is a bourgeois country. We feel that there are some aspects of socialism left in China. But they have their own interests in Syria. Russia has strategic interests in the Middle East as well, and it's being pushed entirely out. And China certainly has economic interests there, and is also under threat right now as this U.S. has moved this big armada into the South China Sea. So I think it's clear that the attacks are not just made in the Middle East, the threats are not in the Middle East, and that they would be next, or sooner or later it would be them. But oil interests, strategic interests, other economic interests. Russia has a military base in Tartus that goes back to the Soviet era, which it's entitled to have. It's in their interest. The anti-imperialist alliance at this point is in their interest. But the pressure increases. The pressure is constant in the UN on both of them. The whole thing earlier this month and into last month, the hysteria about attack helicopters being given by Russia to Syria, which turned out to be an old contract, and refurbished helicopters were being returned. But the British company that insured that ship pulled the insurance. So those helicopters were not delivered. So the pressure increases. And I certainly hope that they can hold out and give Syria the support that it needs, because that's where it's coming from. Russia, China, and Iran. About the media. The media is bourgeois monopolies. They're in business to make money. There's 5 media monopolies that control most of the media in the world, and 4 of them in the U.S. And they interlock with the big oil companies and the military and the rest of the Fortune 500. And their main purpose is to support the interests of the bourgeoisie. And they profit off oil, off military sales. But remember when they were embedded in the first Gulf War, it started with the first Gulf War. And there was a report from one of them where they said, oh, we want to be embedded, that's our job. So I mean, you really have to look at the bourgeois media as that way, as another corporation. And we used to read Al Jazeera, but Al Jazeera is right now, Qatar is now aligned with the imperialists. So we look at those who, for an independent perspective, we look to RT, Russia Today, we look to Press TV, we look to Xinhua, to try to get some real information on what's going on. And about Barron, you know, you can't have a career in politics in this country and be for the Palestinians. I remember Jimmy Carter wrote a book about West Bank conditions for Palestinians, or it was like the apartheid on the West Bank, not in Israel, which it is, of course, but on the West Bank. And 2 years later, he had to apologize to Israel, you know? So it's important that Charles Barron be supported to break through this, because he's a very vehement supporter of the Palestinians. He broke the blockade to Gaza. He went to Gaza.
Okay, I have a few more hands.
We don't know what's going to happen in Syria, but even if the U.S. gets its way, it's not going to help people here. It's not going to do away with stop and frisk. It'll probably embolden the police more if the military is emboldened there. A new U.S. war is going to be flushing money down the toilet, tax money down the toilet. It's not going to help the 43 million people who are uninsured, don't have medical coverage. What about the schools in Oakland that have been closed this month? It's not going to reopen them. And I think we have ways to talk to people about this. I mean, starting with the facts, but that another intervention is not going to do anything for us here. It's just going to make it harder. And this is a hard issue to talk about, but it's never lined up so that it's clear that the bourgeoisie on one side and the workers on the other. They always, the bourgeois media and their mouthpieces, they always obscure everything. That's our job, is to make it clear. We can make this clear, too. I wanted to speak to Fred's question. It's a dilemma for them because they need the military, but it's pretty bold-faced what the military is doing. And what the bourgeoisie here wants to do and the U.S. government wants to do is that they had these 3 or 4 human rights organizations in Egypt that they were utilizing to kind of build up a bourgeois opposition that was attached to them and spoke the language of Western democracy, which is a total sham anyway. The Egyptian government closed them down. Remember a few months ago the military closed them down, and the U.S. threatened to withdraw funds. So you know that's what was important to them. And there's been a little dance over it. They said, well, we'll let 3 of them leave, and then the other ones we're going to arrest, and the U.S. said you had to let them off, and then there was another compromise. But that's what they'd like to do. As far as the Muslim Brotherhood goes, it's a wild card for them. It was at one point last year that the Israeli government said, well, you're not recognizing the 1979 Accords, and the Brotherhood said, oh, maybe we should revisit them. If you want to revisit them, we'll revisit them. There are some people, and the Brotherhood is pretty much on the military discipline, you know. I just Googled it right before I came here, and there are some elements of saying that in the Brotherhood in Egypt that, well, maybe we should have a popular vote on the 1979 treaty. So, I mean, the U.S. and Israel, they don't want to hear that. Whether the Brotherhood is serious about it or not, they don't want to hear it. And what they're afraid of even more is that the Brotherhood has a huge constituency which it's responsible to. And they hate Israel. And they don't want a government in Egypt that's influenced by a mass constituency that hates Israel. They much prefer the military on that, which answers to them. And will weather it out against the people. Those are the problems that the U.S. has with this.